Over the years, my co-founder in Intentional Churches, Bart Rendell, and I, and even our team, we have facilitated literally thousands of strategic church conversations. And so I thought it would be good just to share with you some of the learnings that you can apply even in your own team about how you would have a strategic conversation. And a strategic conversation is nothing more than you're on a retreat or having a staff meeting. You're trying to move your team forward and create a plan. That's all we're saying here. So I'm going to give you a few tips. I would say, number one, to be a facilitator of a great team conversation, you really have to be a great listener. You have to be patient. You have to be able to discern and see beyond maybe even the words that somebody's saying. You have to fight for clarity. Lots of times when team members make statements or they are talking about answering a question, they aren't even clear exactly in their thought. And so being a great listener is one of the early tips I would give you. The second, if you're going to facilitate a great strategic conversation for your team, you have to be an incredible synthesizer. And oftentimes when we facilitate, we've got 10, 12, 14 of your team in the room. And the ability for a facilitator to stand up front, hear conceptually all that's going on, and synthesize that down to the core thing that the team is actually saying, all the while not breaking trust. So it's not about injecting your own idea into it as the facilitator. It's more about you synthesizing the team's role, honoring your senior executive leadership team while you're doing it. So then the third piece I would say is document. Can't tell you how many church leaders where church meetings I've been in, and even some that I ran back in the day in my church where we would be having a great conversation and everybody was into it and we're moving along, but no one documented. So then by document, let me just give you this tip. Buy 3M Post-it note pads just like this and Sharpies just like this. And no, I do not get paid by them to say that. So that when you're having these conversations, somebody can write down what's going on. So we have a historical record of what we've concluded. Another tip I would recommend when you're documenting, it's imperative that if action is coming out of the conversation, that not only you document the action item, but who's the owner and what's the due date for the action. All right, let's get into the next one I'm going to hit on is this idea of, we call it, one of our mentors really taught us this, the principle of guided self-discovery. Too many of us in church leadership are wired a little bit more like a traditional consultant, where we might do some focus groups or assessments, but eventually we're prescriptively going to tell everyone, here's the 3 things, 10 things, 15 things you need to do. And sometimes that prescriptive nature where a team might need, Bart uses this analogy, need a doctor to write a prescription for that ministry issue or problem. It may be needed in some leadership situations. But we've learned over the years, this principle of guided self-discovery leads people to greater personal ownership of the thing, as opposed to, it was my idea, great idea that I told you should do, instead of them discovering it on their own. I use the analogy, if you have kids, when your kids are growing into teenagerhood, where mine are right now, it is part of my wife and I's job to prepare them for launch, to get them to think for themselves and come up with conclusions. And so we're doing a lot more question asking today, as opposed to when they were toddlers. We were being very prescriptive and directive. So hopefully that helps you. And then this is a principle that Jesus taught, exemplified, and that was being a great question asker. And this is an art form. It is a discipline to learn, not to respond with statements. So if you're facilitating a great strategic conversation with your team, you've got to learn to become a great question asker. Jesus did this over and over again in his ministry. One of our team members with IC has written a devotional where he's pulled out like 25 or 30 situations where Jesus asked a question instead of making a statement, even though he knew the answer. And this again speaks to ownership. When you ask great questions, people are then not only prompted, but empowered to self-discover. And that leads to greater ownership. A bonus that we've learned over the years is there is power in the outside voice coming to facilitate. And we oftentimes are asked to do that for churches because one of the things that I did wrong in my years at Canyon Ridge was that I facilitated many of our strategic conversations, and it was confusing to the team because I had two hats on, if you will. One, I'm their boss. I'm the executive pastor. I'm the leader. They're going to look to me to give input. And two, I'm trying to facilitate them to learn and grow and discover and make the plan. And that got super confusing. So there is a moment where you should have an outside voice. So the way this can look is that if you're doing some planning in children's ministry, instead of the children's pastor leading the conversation, maybe you invite in somebody who's a good question asker from the worship ministry to facilitate that conversation. And then, as always with intentional churches, that's something that we do very often, and we'd be happy to partner with you in doing that, is becoming the outside voice that helps your team and allows your team to empower, align, and stay in their leadership spot instead of trying to wear two hats. So that bonus one is the power of the outside voice. So finally, strategic conversations. As an executive pastor for a long time, one of the most important parts of a church's leadership structure is having the right strategic conversations in the right order. And if you'd like to know more about how intentional churches can help you with this, you can go to our website at intentionalchurches.com to check out more about us, and we would be happy to partner with you. Thanks for watching.